but it just was like a mind shift for me to be like, there's no limit. I thought here I was in my late 20s done, that it was like, I'm locked into this career for the rest of my life. So it took influences of multiple people before I was ready to be brave and make that change. But it was because it came from people that I loved and trusted. So that also was a big push to me, just somebody's offhand comment about it's never too late. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Hello and welcome to the Shift Your Day Job podcast. I'm Brittany Cates, your host and companion on this incredible journey of career transformation. Get ready for inspiring stories, valuable insights, and a roadmap to shift your mindset towards a more fulfilling professional life. In each episode, we explore the remarkable journeys of individuals who made the leap from one career to another. As we navigate through these stories together, you'll find motivation, strategies, and the confidence to pursue your dreams. Whether you're feeling stuck, contemplating a change, or just seeking a dose of inspiration, this podcast is your weekly companion. Tune in every Thursday as we uncover the secrets to shifting your day job. I'm Brittany Cates, and I'm here to guide you on your path to a more fulfilling career. So I am just here editing my podcast on the floor of my living room. And I just finished editing my interview with my good friend Sarah Turek. And it was just really nice to have a discussion with her to talk about our parallel experiences with changing our careers from teaching to tech and being a support to one another along the way. I'm listening and editing the podcast and feeling the emotions I felt when we were talking and reflecting on that part of my life, that part of her life when the shifts were happening. And it's just really cool to see where we are now today and the impact that our relationship has had on the trajectory of our professional lives. And I'm just so grateful for her and that we could be that support for one another along the way. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sarah Turek to the Shift Your Day Job podcast. Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
I'm excited for you to be here too. And I have to have you on the show because you're part of my story. And so this is the famous friend that led me to UX design, Sarah Turek. I'm excited for you to be here and for you to share your story.
Yeah, it's been a journey, but it's something that I love sharing with people and love seeing other people not be afraid to take that step because I was scared too. So it's just rewarding to see other people take their own paths in the same way, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Speaking of, let's jump into your background and talking a little bit about your career shift and what that was like for you.
Yeah, I can give you a little rundown. So I went to college for education. I always thought I wanted to do teaching. I changed my mind in college about 6 times and ended up finally settling on secondary Spanish education with a minor in English as a second language. And that led me to teach middle school, which I actually loved the kids and I loved being in my classroom and having that control, but I hated just about everything else. So I was at that same point that you had mentioned where it was like, I have to make a change. I either need to get a master's degree or take on other responsibilities because financially it just wasn't going to work for the rest of my life. And I was looking long term and thinking, okay, if this is what I'm going to do, I have to make it work somehow. And meanwhile, my older brother had gone to a 6-month boot camp in Denver for software development. And he had called me while he was up there, and we don't talk, we text if anything. So I was at first super concerned that something had gone horribly wrong. But he had just told me, he's like, while I've been here, I've been thinking about you, and I think that you would really like development and you should give it a try. And I was like, Stephen, I am an educator. It is a calling. I am not going to change that. But long story short, I ended up looking into it. I found this boot camp, ended up having a cohort that started right after the school year ended. So I packed up and moved back into my parents' basement in my late 20s and went to a 6-month boot camp and ended up doing software development. And I've been doing that now for coming up on 8 years and have had different management roles and just been in different company sizes and shapes. And it's just been a really satisfying career for me. The fact that I've already done it coming up on 3 times as long as I taught is crazy because I feel like my teaching career was a lot heavier mentally, physically, emotionally, as opposed to what I do with development now. So that's how I got to be a software developer.
I think it's interesting as you're talking how your brother was doing something and that was like the bridge or the connection that got you thinking about it or considering it. It's similar to my experience with you. It's also similar to, I just talked to another friend of mine and it was similar for her. It was her husband that was a developer and was like, I like this. And so I think that's just one thing for listeners to consider is who's in your life that knows you really well and you value their opinion and how can they help you figure out what's next.
I tell him all the time that we both went to a place called G School, but I tell him all the time that him going to G School is the best thing that ever happened to me because it put me on a path that I could own a home, do these things that have brought my life fulfillment in a way that I don't think teaching could have ever provided for me. And it was because it was someone I trusted. It took him. And then there was another friend at work. There was a gal that we were working with that was going back to school to get her license in therapy. And one of our other coworkers was like, that's so exciting. I can't wait to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. And this was a woman that had grown children. And I was like, pretty sure you've reached the grown up stage. But it just was like a mind shift for me to be like, there's no limit. I thought here I was in my late 20s done, that it was like, I'm locked into this career for the rest of my life. So it took influences of multiple people before I was ready to be brave and make that change. But it was because it came from people that I loved and trusted. So that also was a big push to me, just somebody's offhand comment about it's never too late. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind that we have these societal structures of you go to high school, you go to college, and then you work. But your path can vary and meander and take you in all different places.
Yeah. And that's okay. And that's allowed. And that should be part of our life. I think it's interesting how we can get so caught up in what we know or like the societal expectations of this linear path. But then when you like really think about it, that doesn't make any sense at all. Life is messy. Like life is unpredictable. And why do we fight against that so much? Like, why can't we just flow with it a little bit more instead of being so stuck in our belief?
Because I feel like when I
this one way.
About other types of goals, whether it be weight loss or exercise or keeping a habit, we talk about that you're trying to move upward, but there's going to be lots of hills and valleys all the way as long as you're consistently making general progress. But for me, in my mind, my work life was not allowed to have that same structure. It needed to be a straight line, straight up. I did never look at my job as something that could have different paths and different ways, even though every other part of my life, I felt like that was important to recognize. For some reason, I couldn't see my job working like that.
Yeah. I think that's an important thing for listeners to ponder. Like, where am I allowing myself the flexibility in my life? And where am I not? And why? Like, why is it okay in this one area, but not in another? And do I want to keep living that way? Do I want to keep looking at things that way? Some introspection opportunities.
Okay.
So can you tell me a little bit about what kind of mindset work did you have to do in order to take that leap and go in quitting teaching and going back to school. What did that look like for you internally?
So I had a pretty intense internal issue. It wasn't really until I got into the program, because as anyone who has taught or worked in education knows, by the time the end of the school year runs around, you're just ready to run anywhere else besides the building. I wasn't feeling any regrets about that because it was like, it was June, I was done. I was like, okay, I'm going to jump into this. I'm going to do this. And as I was going to class every day, and it was really hard, and I had to commute downtown, and we were in a classroom 9 to 5 and then going home and doing homework and going back. And it was a lot, one, and it was expensive too. So I was putting a lot of money into it, and I had gotten rid of all my student loans and I was financially freed. So I was like, why have I put myself in this position? I was good at teaching. Like, why would I give up something that was known? And so I had to do a lot of reminding myself that just because it's new doesn't mean it's bad. Just because it's different doesn't mean that it's wrong. And it was a lot of fighting off my imposter syndrome, which was a constant battle still always. But there was also, I remember there was a specific day that I just had a panic that I was like a sellout because I gave up teaching for something that you could easily write it down to say, I didn't make enough money, so I left teaching to do this. And in the end, there was a lot more reasons than just financial. It was not fulfilling in any aspect of my life, but I felt like a fraud and I felt like a sellout, as silly as that sounds. And I called another friend of ours who was thankfully on her break. She was still was teaching. We taught at the same school, and she was like, I watched you. Like, you were dying. This was not a good place for you to be. And so the things that I had to look for were one in myself, just constantly reminding myself that it's okay to take time for yourself. It's okay to take those risks and be a little selfish. Take that time to make choices for you. So in the long term, you can help others. And then again, turning to those people I trusted, turning to those people that knew me in both aspects of my career, and living with my parents and having them be able to tell me. My mom, I had called her up in a tizzy after quite a few staff meetings when I was teaching, and her being like, remember this, remember you're doing this for good reasons. So it was both internal and external for me of having good reminders of other people, but a lot of just being like, it's okay. And you're allowed to take risks. You're allowed to be brave for yourself. And that can be scary to do sometimes.
I love that. This idea of being brave for yourself. I think that's really, I love that phrase because I don't know, just really hit me. Thank you for sharing that.
I don't know how far back you want to peel the curtain here, but Brittany and I, we lived together for your listeners share. We were roommates at this time, and we were both struggling of this is hard. And it was hard to be in this society and in this structure that felt like we were already doing the right thing. That I don't know if you felt that the same way that I did, but it was like you're helping the youth and you're doing service and you're being strong, and that it was hard. And it was hard to take that step and say, I want to do this for me. And that's still stuff that I'm working through of being okay with that. But being able to take it to your career almost seems like safer than taking it for like relationships or anything. So it's like a good place to start to be like, okay, I can do my job for me. Maybe then I'll figure out how to love myself, but we're going to start with my job first because the other part's too scary. But
yeah. I mentioned in my first episode how it's not really about the career change. Yeah, it's about who you become.
And it is a journey of self-discovery, and it is a journey of being able to stand for yourself. And however you have, whatever your spirituality looks like in your life, and I mean that in your self-reflection or religion or however you want to look at that, is scary. It's scary to crack open your heart and say, what do I really want out of life? It's easy to just go through the motions and say, I just want to have a good job and be with my family and do all these things. But what do I really want for me is a much scarier concept. And I'm not going to pretend I haven't figured out, but because heaven knows I don't. And I'm still working on like the hard stuff, but having proof that it's possible and having proof of now here 7+ years in of being like, this was good. And it was scary and it was hard, but it was good. And it makes it easier for other aspects of my life where it's been hard and I maybe don't see the good yet, but that it's maybe I just need to go down the road. But it's just it's a good reminder for me that I'm still trying to figure out how to take my job and put it within my like self-reflective part of my being, but we'll get there eventually.
Yes, it's always a work in progress.
Mhm.
But as long as you're doing the work and taking the baby steps, then that's great. It's not all gonna download at once, right?
Yeah. But that can be the hardest part is just like the action portion of it, of just like doing and saying, I'm going to go, I'm going to commit, I'm going to try. And once you have momentum building, that helps. But mm, I don't know how you felt, but it felt like jumping off a big cliff that it was like, okay, I'm going to try this. When you switch to interior design and when you made these other changes, that it's scary to just leave what you know. And
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the biggest hurdles was teaching was so familiar. And that's why it was so easy to go back to
yeah,
over and over again because I knew what to expect in a sense.
well, it's that devil you know, devil you don't. And it's, at least with teaching, I know it's going to be this. And I've dealt with that. I know that. Whereas the tech industry, we went from a very female dominated field to a very male dominated field and just very different. It attracts very different personalities. It's a very different realm socially as well. So it's a big change.
How did you overcome self-doubt in your career change? And do you have any advice for people facing something similar?
Yeah, I think imposter syndrome is very real. And I feel like it's almost to the point now that people have just thrown it out as a catch-all term or to just be like, imposter syndrome, blah, blah, blah. But it's very real. And it takes reminding yourself and taking the evidence that you see in your real life. And even if you need to keep track of it, there's nothing wrong with keeping a note in your phone or a folder on your computer of like your positive reviews of the things that went well. I am very close with my brother and his wife, and the three of us do this for each other. When one of us is freaking out about our jobs of being like, I've got a meeting tomorrow, I'm going to get fired, or whatever. And then it's remember last time when XYZ happened, and remember that your manager said this about you, and not extrapolating your own experience from nothing, which I feel like is a common thing that we go to worst case scenarios, that it's just like, well, it means this. And it's like, what in my past history would make me think that it would go immediately to that? And sometimes even just saying, okay, worst case scenario is I lose my job. Okay. And it's happened to me and I've lost my job and then I found another one and it's okay. And so it's constantly reminding myself and giving yourself grace, giving yourself space and being okay with where you're at. And I think a huge part is not comparing yourself to what you think other people are. Because I don't think our issue, especially as women, is comparing ourselves to other people. It's comparing ourselves to what we've built up of other people. We're not comparing ourselves to how they actually are, but how we have perceived them, how we have decided that they are. And at the beginning of my career, I would find myself doing this with my brother because we both went to the same school. He was about a little less than a year ahead of me in his career. So I was like, oh, well, I should be to where he is. I should be at this point. And our careers went in two very different directions. So we don't even qualify or try for the same jobs anymore. Like we just, our careers have taken us very different places. But I had to stop looking at him as like this golden boy. Because then at one point I finally was like, okay, I need to stop this. And I actually went to his GitHub and I was like looking at his stuff and his code and his website and all these things. And I was like, oh, I can do that. Like he wasn't, not that my brother's a great developer and he's good at his job, but he wasn't this like shining perfect prodigy that I was comparing myself against. I wasn't comparing myself against his actual self. It was what I had decided he was. And so it takes a clear understanding of yourself and other people. And that is tricky. And I think it's easier to start with understanding yourself and being okay with yourself and not deciding you have to be something you're not, which is way easier said than done. But just a huge thing for me is reminding myself of that and reminding myself what I am good at and what I do excel at and what I can bring to the table.
Yeah. It makes me think of this idea of being worthy when I get here. Like, I'm not
Yes.
worthy yet until I get to this point, whether it's this woman in my mind that I think is like the epitome of perfection, or whether it's somebody else that I'm putting on a pedestal and saying, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough until I get where they are, because they look like they've got it all figured out.
They've got it together. Yeah.
And it's a constant battle, but I love that idea of writing it down and remembering what people have said and what has happened for you in the past. As you said that, I have actually like screenshotted compliments that I've gotten
Yes.
from people that I work with, especially from the early days of my UX career when I'm just like, I don't know what to do. And then you get this random compliment and you're like, oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
I guess I'm doing better than I thought. But it also is really interesting how our past really informs how we react to certain things or how we interpret things. And I mean, I've experienced similar, going into a meeting and being like, is this it? Am I going to get fired? Yep. I don't know what's happening. And then, or going into a meeting and being so like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sorry. I don't have anything.
Yeah.
Say, I just feel like I'm not doing enough. And then hearing, actually, this is what I see. And I think it's just really interesting how our past informs our current reactions, and yet we have the power to rewrite it, to change it. And this idea of your brain looks for evidence of what you're looking for. You know what I mean? If you're looking for the threat or like the oh crap moment, like your brain will find evidence to support that. And so you get to flip the script and say, no, I'm going to look for the positive instead of the negative and practicing.
And it's hard. And you've actually been a good example to me of going and not being afraid to talk to your supervisor or whatever and say, what do you want from me? What are your expectations? Because it's easy to be like, they want this and this from me. And to be like, wait, who said that? Nobody said that. I've made that up. I've decided what's being expected of me. And I've always been one that just sits at my computer and it is what it is. And having talked to you, and when you go talk to your people at work and describe your meetings that you've had with your supervisors and that, I'm like, oh yeah, I can talk to those people and be reminded that those are the standards I need to be worrying about. What my employer cares about, not what some guy on Twitter said that made me feel like I was a bad developer, because who cares? It's what in my immediate realm is going to impact my experience.
Yeah. Like this reminder of choosing the voices you're listening to and the things you're paying attention to, because there's a lot of noise and it's easy to get caught up in the noise and what other people are saying, social media, people on LinkedIn. And sometimes I just have to be like, not today, not even looking. I'm not going to even go there.
And to be okay with, I feel like LinkedIn has, nobody get mad at me, but has turned into this weird grind set culture where I see all these posts and they're like, I missed my child's birth and it was awesome. And I'm like, whoa, crazy. That's not how it should be. Like, this is your job. Don't you still want a life? And I realized for me, I want a work-life balance. And I'm never going to be one of those people because that's not what I want for myself. And if that is what you want, I'm like, more power to you. You're the ones that are being movers and shakers and doing that. But I have realized that is not what I want from my life experience. I want a work-life balance. I want to be able to work from home. I want to have the flexibility to work from wherever so I can travel and see my nieces and nephew and then be involved in parts of their lives that aren't here, and to be okay with that and not see all those posts and be like, oh, I'm a bad developer. I'm never going to be successful because I'm not like this guy that's got 100,000 reactions on his stuff and that's giving up everything for that. But that's okay because that's not what I want. And just having reasonable expectations for your own personal goals can be hard with, like you said, with all that noise, with all that input of saying, here's what it should look like when it doesn't have to. It's personal.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that reminder of getting to choose what your career looks like or what your life looks like. You get to decide what you want, and it doesn't have to look like anybody else's. Like, I think it goes back to the societal expectations. You think you have to fit in this certain box in order to be successful. But if you take a step back, what does your idea of success look like for you? What is your idea of a work-life balance look like for you? And being able to establish your wants and needs and then your non-negotiables. When you go into the job search, these are my non-negotiables. This is what I'm looking for. If you can't provide that for me, then I'm going to keep looking. And that's okay. You are allowed to do that.
And taking in with that mindset. So a couple of things. I think one, when you can get to that point, it's very liberating, but it can be hard to get there. But being able to say, these are my non-negotiables and this is what I'm looking for. That can change with times and seasons. If you've got a family, that might change as you've got more space, or even just emotional time and space, that it's not going to work at different times. But to find what's really important. So for me as a developer, I've realized what I really care about is that I am in a company that allows me to create, that allows me to be creative. So not stuck in doing only QA or doing only automated testing. Obviously, there's no dream job. And of course, every developer wants to develop. That's what we all like, to create things. But I have been fortunate enough to have positions where I have been given a little more freedom in that and been able to, mixed in with the bug fixes and mixed in with that, have some creative freedom and have a team that supports me and appreciates me. And I found that's way more important than what the actual company does. People will ask me all the time, what's your dream job? And it's, what would you want to code? What kind of company? And I'm like, I don't really care as long as it's honorable, as long as it doesn't go against my moral compass, and that it's with people that let me grow and that are encouraging that. That's something I didn't understand at the beginning of my career. I thought that it would be really important about what product I was making or what company it was. And now that's changed of, okay, what really matters is having a team that I get along with, that I can communicate with, that listens, and that I can understand them, because there's a lot of personalities in tech. And one of my best friends, we did G School together and ended up at the same company for a bit. And she and I communicated great. Myself and our supervisor, project manager guy, communicated great, but the project manager and her could not communicate. And I would sit in meetings and I was like, I understand you and I understand you, and I don't understand what happens when you talk to each other. And I could see how frustrating that was for both of them. And it was like, okay, so that's a problem too. And it wasn't a problem with either of them as people, or they were friends. We all got along. But it was like, okay, so I need an environment where I'm heard and understood and where I can hear and understand. And it's those things that you learn as you go, and you realize more of what you're looking for, and that you can't learn that from a job post. So you're going to have to do more interviews. Nobody likes interviewing. It's not fun, but it's the only way you're going to figure that out. And another thing that I try to take into interviews is to not feel like I need to beg them for the job. I felt like I always would go and be like, but here's why you should hire me. And like, please just give me a chance. Let me try this. And then it's, no, is this a good fit? I'm not just here for acceptance. I might not want to work here after this. And that's a really hard mindset. I have to channel other people, because I'm not good at that one, of being like, okay, what would other people do? How would I handle this situation? Because I just want to be like, but if not, that's fine. If you don't want me, that's okay. So being confident in what you can bring to the table. But it takes experience, and it takes trying, and it takes failing, and it sucks, but that's how we get to where we are.
Yeah. This idea of fail fast so that you can get back up again and keep going, because learning comes from failure as much as we're afraid of it. And so walking away from that interview and thinking, okay, what did I learn? And I'm I know I'm not getting that job, but what did I learn from
Yeah.
it? It's okay. It probably just wasn't the right fit for me. How can I go into the next interview better prepared? Whatever it is.
I love that. Fail fast, because it's how I just think that's a smart one to keep in mind. There was a company when I first graduated and I was interviewing, and there's this company I really liked and I really wanted to work for them. And they strung me along on an interview process for months and then ended up giving it to another guy from my class. And I was devastated. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And all this, and turned it into this whole ordeal about myself. And in the end, I met up with this friend months later, and it was a horrible job. And I had dodged a huge bullet, and he ended up being laid off and the company folded and all this stuff. And he said they weren't great to women there. So there's nothing I could change about that. Like, they were never going to hire me because I'm a woman. And I sat with that failure for so long. And instead, if I could have just said, okay, on to the next. But it was my first foray into the tech world. It was my first introduction. I didn't know how to fail fast. And that was just a good learning experience for me. I'm just being like, so it's a no, big deal. But it took me having to stew with it and be like, what did I do? I'm the worst. No, it just wasn't a good fit. So
Feel your feelings. And I know I've told you that before, but feel your feelings. One thing I learned recently was that an emotion through your body, it only physically lasts for 90 seconds. But the reason why we think it lasts longer is because we decide to stew over and make meaning of that feeling for a longer period of time. And I thought that was really interesting.
yeah,
And so if we know that feelings only last this long, then we can choose to shorten that window of how long we decide to ruminate over what that feeling means.
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because yes, you have many times told me to feel my feelings because I don't like them. I don't like feeling them. But that's just an interesting to have the like scientific, the anatomical part of that. Your body just says, okay, you get 90 seconds and then it's your choice. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good reminder of when I get in those things of, okay, your body felt it for 90 seconds. Now, what are you going to choose to do with it? Sometimes I want to sit in it for a minute, but it's a good reminder of it really is a choice to how you want to move on from that. So very cool.
Yeah. And again, take that time that you need, but don't take too much time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like in your story, your example, that just stuck with you for so long. And if only you could have snapped out of it faster. And so now you've gone through that experience and you know you don't want to live there that long. So how are you going to handle it the next time? You do have control over how long it lasts. Anyway, I just think it's interesting. And it takes practice, guys.
Yeah, you got to keep trying. You got to keep failing. And I value myself more. And at that point, I was like, I'm just a lowly junior developer that someone needs to take a chance on. And I was like, no, I still had a lot to bring to the table. I had a complex background. I had a lot of life experience. I wasn't fresh out of high school. I had a lot of things to bring to the table, but I had decided that this is what a good developer looked like. And instead of being like, oh, I switched from teaching, it's no, here's what I learned from teaching and here's how it's going to come and bring to the table. Here's what I learned. I could go back to, I worked daycare for a million years. Here's things I learned about working with kids that can help me. I know how to pivot quickly. I know how to read the room. I'm good at communicating. I have these skills that I can bring that have nothing to do with development, but are making me an attractive employee. And so I've had to work on that one too. You got to keep trying, got to keep reflecting, got to keep reminding yourself of what you're good at. And I really like that idea of you find what you look for. I don't think I see a lot of red cards, and then you start looking in all your red cards and just, so be looking for the things you bring to the table, because we all bring a unique and important aspect. And if you're trying to be somebody else, it's not genuine and it's not going to be fulfilling for you or the people you work with.
Thank you for that reminder. Can you talk about the support system that you built in the process of changing careers or being in this development space and it was new, and then how you sought guidance through networking or mentorship?
So as I had mentioned, my family was really huge in this. My brother, especially my older brother, the one that did the program, because it was very easy to compare and say, hey, you were just here less than a year ago. What was that like? And so to be able to have someone in the same space that understands was really helpful. I'd come home from class frustrated about things, and to just be able to text him and be like, oh, we were talking about merge conflicts, and not have to explain the whole context. Just having friends that understand the context is huge. And that doesn't have to be a best friend. That doesn't have to be a sibling, but you need people in your space that understand it. When I was teaching, having teacher friends is a huge help, because you don't have to caveat everything and be like, I love the kids, but it's, yeah, we know you love the kids, but it also sucks. Building that and having this dear friend that we ended up working together, and it was a lifelong friendship that came from that. And she ended up leaving work and is raising kids and is a stay-at-home mom now, but I can still, we still talk every day. We're texting all the time and just that she understands the space, the struggles we went through and the industry, and that helps. But then some of my greatest supports are people that have no connection to the industry at all, and just people that care about me and that I can talk to and listen to. Family's huge. And as you had mentioned, we connected back over Marco Polo, and I did that with a couple of girlfriends, and I was like, oh yeah, I can still have friends. And just taking this space and the time to reach out and have like a social construct in that there's structures in place to have people there. I've reconnected with some cousins of mine that are now adults, that just being able to have people that even tangentially understand the industry or just understand what it's like to have a job. Anybody that's working full time. One of my closest friends is an old college roommate that has 6 kids and doesn't work. And we have very different lives, but we can still commiserate about the stress of being busy and living a life. But it takes reaching out, and it is not something I'm great at. But having different ways and learning, like through Marco Polo, was a great way for us to stay in touch. And because it works for me. I don't do well if somebody wants to call and talk for 3 hours. I'm not good at that, but I can do a message here or a message there. And I don't post a ton on social media because it's not great for my headspace. And so it's learning what is going to be supportive and learning what I can trim out that's just going to be hurtful to me. And I think, again, it comes in times and seasons that sometimes you need a lot more support than others. And sometimes you need to be the support for other people. But we don't need to make it harder for ourselves by going it alone. And that's always my go-to. That's always my gut reaction is, I got this, I don't need help. And I do. I very much do.
Yeah. Community is so important as a human being, just having that kind of connection. And in this day and age, it's really easy to just be in your own world, your own room, your own computer, and think you're connecting with people, but you're really all by yourself. And having those people in your life that you can reach out to and be that support system and you can rely on is really important. Oh, and as you're talking, it also makes me think like having you in my circle has helped me a ton, because I can go to you, and even though I'm a UX designer or developer, you've been in the tech space for a while. And so a lot of times I'll come to you, I'm like, is this normal? I don't know what's going on. Or
just like I say, developers are weird. We're weird people. And
or I can come to you. Or I can come to you and say, guess what my developers talked about today?
And I'll be like, I know that one.
Yeah. And you're like, oh yeah, we love that. Nerdy stuff. I don't know.
It's the best.
I tease my developers sometimes. I'm like, this is so nerdy, and I know you're going to love it. And I'm like, I hope I didn't offend you. I mean it in an endearing way.
Thank you.
But yeah. And that also makes me think of times when I'm like, they talked about this thing. What is it, Sarah?
Let me bridge the gap.
Oh, please interpret nerd speak now.
Anytime. That's my jam.
I appreciate it. As we wrap up, Can you offer any practical tips or resources for our listeners to help them with shifting their mindset towards pursuing a new career?
So I think one thing is that you have to be knowledgeable of what's available. I didn't even know that this was an option. I didn't even know this was something that was there for me. And it's a tricky balance because if there's too much, then you have decision paralysis and you're not going to make any choices. But if you're not satisfied in your career, then start looking around, see what else is available, what interests you. Because for me, one thing that I really like about coding, which on the surface doesn't seem to make a huge connection, is I loved language learning. One of my majors was linguistics, and that was my favorite major. But then I realized I couldn't do anything with it because it's languages and it's puzzles. And that's what coding is. It's languages and puzzles, and it's taking a problem and solving it. And you learn different languages. And that was a natural aptitude I have that I could translate into this. But I would have never connected those dots. It took someone else being like, hey, and it was, again, my brother being like, you know how you like to do this? Did you know that coding was that? And I was like, no, I had no idea. And looking for what's available. And then I still call them non-traditional education, but I'm glad to see that it's becoming more traditional, that you don't have to go back to college. You don't have to, there's so many different options for educating yourself and making these changes. And like you did your course and it was different than my course. And there's stuff that's full online, stuff you can do while you're working. I was fortunate enough to have the summer where I was not teaching, where I was still getting paid, but worked out for me there. But that there's just a lot of options. So educate yourself, be aware of what's out there. And networking is huge for that. Talk to people that are in a different industry than what you are, because I didn't know anything about tech when I was teaching. It just wasn't my world. But as I've talked to people in it, there's just a whole, there's all these careers. And I remember when I was back in Colorado doing my tech thing of talking to a friend that was like, oh, you could do business, you could do this. And she started listing off all these things. And I was like, nope, too much. Then you're stressing me out. But there is just an endless list of things that you can still become. Like, it's not too late, but don't stress yourself out. But look, it's a lot of balance. But I would say educate yourself and figure out what is available. And with that, really have an understanding of what you want, as we talked about, and what that means, what your career goals are, and whether it's a financial goal, which there's nothing wrong with wanting to make more money. No, I don't think most of us would work if we didn't get paid. And that's not a bad reason, because I think of the things that bring me the most fulfillment and joy in my life that I could not do with money, because that's the world we live in. And so don't feel guilty about wanting to live a comfortable life. Like, I don't think you should be a miser and be taking advantage of people, but that's not inherently bad. And so it's okay to have financial goals, but is it, you want to be in an office? Do you want remote? Do you want to, is sitting at a computer going to suck your soul away? Then don't do development. Knowing yourself and then aligning those goals. But there's something out there. If you're feeling very stuck and very unhappy, there is a better answer. I'm never going to love working. I don't want to work. It's just not who I am. But I know that it doesn't have to be torture. It doesn't have to be awful. And what I do is so much more fulfilling to my mind, to all of me, than what teaching was for me. And would I appreciate it this much if I hadn't taught? I don't know. But it doesn't have to be horrible. And so if you're struggling and you're feeling stuck, like, it can get better. But it's going to take aligning what's available and what you want and putting the work in. So I don't know about what, like a practical website or whatever it would be, but use your people, use your network, use your friends, figure out what jobs even exist, because there's a lot. And you may find yourself, I just look at the UI field. I've got another cousin that's doing that as well. And he has a graphic design degree and doing all this. And I didn't even know this was an option. I didn't even know you could merge these two worlds. Use your resources.
Yeah, exactly. it wasn't until I started exposing myself to maybe new people or new ideas or getting suggestions and researching that like this whole world of possibilities opened up. And I was like, people make money doing this? Like, what? Like, I don't do that. Whereas when you're like in a job, like I was just in teaching, in education for so long, and I couldn't see the other opportunities. And so, yeah, taking advantage of, there's so many resources available, podcasts and Googling and your network, and just gather information and knowing yourself. Take time. Like, there's all this information out here, but also come back here.
Yeah, because if you don't have at least one of those fields solidified, you're going to be trying to put together pieces that are never going to match, because you got to know at least one side. Either you know what you want to do or you know what you need, and you can find it that way. But it's going to take some decisions and some goals, and there's something out there. It doesn't have to be so hard.
Yeah. And recognizing your strengths and then trying to figure out how can you utilize those in a different way. Maybe than you've been, because like you mentioned earlier, like we all have something unique to bring to the table, and we have so many transferable skills that we might not even give ourselves credit for, that we need to oftentimes sit down and think, okay, so I did this in teaching, how does this translate into this possible career, into development? And you gave a great example of that earlier.
Yeah, and those are good preparatory exercises for job interviews, for cover letters, for those things of, okay, so we've got 100 applicants. What makes you special? And I know that I'm good at this. I know I can bring this, and this is how it's going to help you. So it's never wasted energy to do that introspection and figure out how your strengths make you a better employee, make you a better person.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here on the podcast today.
Yes.
And for this wonderful discussion. I always love chatting with you. And I'm so grateful that you're my friend and that you're a part of my life. And thanks for helping me get where I am today. It was like one conversation. It was like one suggestion. And it just set me on a new trajectory. So thank you.
Like I said, as you've been on it, you've been inspiring to me in a lot of ways. So I'm glad we're friends too. Thank you for being my friend.
I want to thank Sarah for being a guest on my podcast today. It was a pleasure to talk to somebody who I know so well, and there's an ease about the conversation and realness that only comes with knowing someone for many years. I'm grateful that she's a part of my life and that we can come together and reflect on the past and commiserate about similar experiences and also celebrate similar experiences. I hope you walked away with some guidance and inspiration that will help you along your new career journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend who you think could benefit from this message and leave a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for the podcast to get to more people. So I appreciate your support. Thank you again for being here. I'm your host, Brittany Cates, and together, let's shift your day job.